Hello! So this evening we're going to be doing the cold and dark startup procedures for the Boeing 777 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is made by Captain Sim. It's one of the budget aircraft, and I've been pleasantly surprised by it just recently. Yes, it's not as high fidelity as the PMDG or the Phoenix aircraft available in the simulator, but it's not bad. And for anybody starting out, it's a very reasonable way of getting into the big jets. Okay, so let's go and jump inside the airplane. I'm going to be working through a checklist that I've written up, and I'll put a link to the checklist in the notes of the video, and you'll be able to see it. So I'm going to turn off the head tracking, because the last thing you want is me waving my head around as I'm looking at the checklist. So the first thing on my checklist to check is the controller configuration. If we go and look in the control options in the simulator, and we go and look and select the controller, so this is my throttle quadrant over here, and you can see I've got a profile for the 777 specifically. So if I go into power management, we'll see why. So I've had to configure the throttle 1 axis 0 to 100 and throttle 2 axis 0 to 100 to be the joystick L axis X and L axis Y. This is on the Thrustmaster Airbus quadrant. If we go and look in sensitivities, you will see that I have set the neutral setting to 50% on both, and what that does, if we go back and resume and look in the cockpit, if I move my throttles, I have got the Airbus reverser switches down at the moment, so I'm being limited from getting to the far end of its travel. If I lift those switches, I get the reversers. So that's what that 50% normal setting is on the throttle axis sensitivities. So it just allows that to work nicely. Okay, so let's work through the startup procedure together. So overhead, we're going to press Control and 7 to get overhead. It's worth pointing out, this aircraft doesn't have the best default views, so we'll be working around the limitations of that along the way. So Control 7 takes us overhead. First thing we need to do is turn the battery on. So we do that over here. The next thing we would do, if we had external power available, which we don't, is go and turn on external power, but we don't have it, so we're not going to worry about it. So we will just go and turn on the APU, okay, and then turn it to start, which will fire it up, and you'll hear systems come up over the next few seconds around the aircraft. I don't think the spool up time is altogether accurate for the APU. It seems to be pretty much immediate. Okay, so the next thing we will do is go and turn on the nav light down here. So that tells any crew on the ground around the aircraft that we're on board and getting it ready for flight. Okay, so flight management computer. So to get to that, we're going to press Control and 1, which is not looking at the flight management computer, but it's nearby. So we're going to hold the right mouse button down and drag the mouse, and we can look at the flight management computer. Okay. So the first thing it's asking us to do is to set our position. So we've got POS in it. So a general rule on the Boeing flight management computers is that they say what the next step is at the bottom right. You'll notice it says 7478i at the top. That gives you an idea of how Captain Sim make their aircraft so cheaply. They borrow parts from the standard aircraft and then modify them. But you know, it's actually perfectly usable, so I'm not going to get on their case about it. So let's go POS in it, and the first thing we need to do is fill in any mandatory fields. Now, a mandatory field on a Boeing flight management computer, or FMC, is one with square boxes. Okay, so what we do is we select the GPS position by clicking the soft key next to it, and that copies it into this area at the bottom called the scratch pad. We can actually type into the scratch pad. You can see those letters appearing down there. If we press the clear button, that will erase what we've just typed. So we could have typed that in, but we can also select things to copy them into the scratch pad. So once it's in the scratch pad, we can just click the key next to an empty field, and it will populate it with it. So if we click that one, you can see it transfers it across, and it's done. Next thing we need is the reference airport. So we are at Stansted Airport. The ICAO code, or the four-letter code for Stansted, is Echo Golf Sierra Sierra. So type that in the scratch pad and then drop it into the reference airport, and it comes up with the location of that as well. So then we go to the route page, and on the real thing, I think this is another shortcoming, it should have really copied across the the reference airport into the scratchpad for us already, but we'll just key it in again, and then we can drop that into the origin. That's where we're flying from, and we're going to pretend we're flying to Edinburgh today. So Echo Golf Papa Hotel is the ICAO code for Edinburgh Airport. So we drop that on the destination and it fills it in. Now you'll notice at the top it says 1 of 2. So that means we are on page 1 of 2. So if we go next page, we get the route page. So any waypoints or airways in between the departure and the destination, you can fill into this page. Now I'm not going to be using any airways, I'm just going to be using waypoints, but the general rule is you put waypoints on the right and airways on the left. So you might say I'm going to a particular waypoint to begin with when you take off. Then you could say I'm taking an airway from that waypoint to another waypoint, and then another airway to another waypoint, and so on and so forth. But we're not. We're just going to use one waypoint mid-route today, which will be the Trent VOR. So I type in the code for the Trent VOR, and I put it in the 2 box. Remember, so waypoints on the right. So it takes a few seconds to find it usually. It just seems to be a quirk of this aircraft. Eventually when it comes up, give it a few seconds. This is the pregnant pause, isn't it, where we think the aircraft's gone wrong, but it hasn't. Okay, so there we go. And there's several in there. The one at 53 degrees will be the one in England. So you could obviously check this on your chart to find out the exact location of the one, just to make sure. The reason there are many listed here is there are many waypoints called TNT around the world. Okay, so we select the one we want, and it puts a direct to TNT. So notice if you don't put in an airway, it just says direct, so it's going straight to the waypoint. So at this point we can activate our route and execute it. So whenever you see the execute button light up, I tend to hit it before I leave the page. You can leave things not executed and batch them up. I don't typically, just in case the system doesn't support it properly, or just to make sure in my own mind I know what I've done. Okay, so if we go back to the previous page, you'll see at the bottom right again it's saying go to performance initialization next. So we'll go there, and we can say the cost index is a required field. So this is a number that governs how aggressively the airplane can accelerate or how much fuel it can burn in climbing and and just accelerating off the runway, that kind of thing. So cost index, we're going to type in 100. If you've generated a flight plan through something like Simbrief, you will probably have a cost index on that flight plan, on the operational flight plan, and it will be a CI number printed on the flight plan. So we're just going to pick one out of thin air. We're going to say 100 and drop it in. The numbers can be anywhere from 0 up to 200, 300, I think. So reserves is the number of thousands of pounds of fuel you want in reserve in case you have to do a go around or a diversion to another airfield. So we're going to put in 3. Now the rendering of this is rubbish because it looks like it's saying £3. It does mean 3,000. So we can execute our changes here, and then we can go to the thrust limit page, and we'll leave this alone. This is governing how the aeroplane performs on takeoff and climb, and we're going to leave everything as standard. So then we're going to go to the takeoff page, and we have to put in the flap level we're expecting to use. So we'll go 10 degrees, and then we can set the V speeds. It will calculate them for us. So this is the rotation speeds that are called out as we run down the runway, or that appear on the indicated airspeed ribbon alongside the attitude indicator. So if we just click on each one, it will work out based on the aircraft weight and the flight conditions what to do there. Okay, notice it's got a centre of gravity as well. We'll come back to that in a moment. So thrust limit is the next page. So it goes back round in a loop at that point. Okay, so we've done the performance. We haven't said specifically how to leave Stansted or how to arrive at Edinburgh yet though. So we go to the departure arrival page for that. So go to DEP R, go to DEP for departures to set the Stansted departure, so you can say which runway we're using and which standard instrument departure we're using. So that's the sequence of waypoints we will follow when we leave the airfield. So we'll say we're going to use runway 22, and we'll use the BKY 5R standard instrument departure. So just to give this some context, I don't think I've got it running. I'm going to run a free piece of software for you called LittleNavMap, and we'll sketch out the route we're doing, just so you get some idea what I'm talking about here. So here we are at Stansted. So I'll do a new flight plan and say set Stansted as my departure. And we'll look up the location of Edinburgh. So double click on it, and we'll right click on Edinburgh and set that as our destination. So on the map, LittleNavMap has shown us that's where we're flying from and to. Now if we say show the procedures, show departure procedures for Stansted, you can see these are the standard instrument departures. So on runway 22, BKY5R, that's what that actually looks like, that blue line. So we can insert that into our flight plan. I've got lots of videos about LittleNavMap, by the way, so if you search my channel you can find some really good walkthroughs of all of the functionality. So you remember we said in the middle of our route we want the Trent VOR. If we go way up the country, there's the Trent VOR. So if we add that to our flight plan, we're going to fly across to Trent, and then when we get to Edinburgh we can right click on Edinburgh and we can show the arrival procedures. So say we wanted to come in on this runway, which would be 24, we can sketch that in look and it will show us what it would look like, and we can right click and insert that. Let's just stop this from centering back up on where we are. So that's the ILS, but then you've got the standard terminal arrival routes, which is the final few waypoints before you get there, and they've got AGP E1E. So we'll go and insert that, and we'll say if we were coming into T4, and that's what it would look like. Okay, so the reason they have these agreed routes is you may have various different routes all overlapping each other, so it's an agreed way for aircraft to follow the same path through the sky to avoid each other in a safe manner. It becomes much more important around big cities. So if you imagine London City, London, Biggin Hill, Heathrow, Northolt, London Luton, they've all got different routes that are all intersecting with each other but are cleanly missing each other. Okay? Right, so that's our basic route. So we've done the departure, runway 22 and BKY5R, and we execute that. Then we go back to the index, and then we look at Edinburgh, and we go to the arrival settings for Edinburgh, and remember we said ILS for runway 24, and we want to do the AGP E1E standard terminal arrival route, or STAR. There's a transition as well. All the transition really means is your entry point into the arrival route. Okay, so we're going to execute that change, because some stars will have many transitions available. Okay, so then we go to route. Actually, we're done. Route will come back to that front page of, setting up the route again. So once you have done your departure and arrival, and you've done init.ref is the same as the performance initialization we saw earlier. So we can go to perf in here. You can see all of that. So once you've done your departure and arrival, if you go and look in legs, you will see the whole route listed out, and you can step through it. And what you're looking for is any discontinuities, and we haven't got any. Typically, if you put a waypoint in the middle of your route, as we did on our route page, you won't have any discontinuities. So a discontinuity is where you get a gap in the flight plan where it doesn't know what to do next. Okay, so if we can simulate it for you. So if we go next page, you can see there's that Trent VOR we put in the middle. So say we wanted to go via the Pol VOR, so add Pol Hill. So we need to type Pol in. This is how to insert waypoints, by the way. And we put it on top of the one we want to push down. So if we select AGPED while we've got Pol in here, wait for a second, give it a moment. It's asking which one we mean. It's the 53-degree one. So we've now got Trent. Give it a moment, it just hasn't drawn it yet. Unless it's got it wrong, of course. Oh, it's put it in the wrong place. So this is a bug. This is a bug in the FMC of the Captain Sim, so we're not going to worry too much. What we can do then is we want to get rid of this because it's in the wrong place. So what we do is we select the line below it and we select that line and it will pull this up. Yeah, and it's gone. And then we just execute the change. So that showed you both how to inject lines and how to remove them again afterwards, because it did highlight there are bugs in this, so you need to be careful. So then we can activate our changes and execute them. So when we were modifying the flight plan, that said mod at the top and the activate option appeared. Yeah, so you can play with the flight plan all you like. If you want to get to the top of the list of legs, you just press legs. And if you actually want to see your legs on the screen to make sure it all makes sense, if we press F and then we switch, these are the controls for this display. At the moment it's in map mode, and if we increase the range on it, you'll see it makes some sense. You can actually see our flight plan look. If you turn it to plan mode, what it does, if we just move the screen here slightly, plan mode shows us a waypoint in the middle and it puts a center marker on this screen on the legs page. But it also turns the bottom right soft key into a step button. So we can repeatedly press step and move through our flight plan. So if we execute, sorry, not execute, step, 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 and we can go through our flight plan making sure it looks correct. Obviously we can zoom out so we can get a wider view. You'll notice as well these numbers on the outside of this do not match these. That's another bug in the aircraft, I'm afraid. So step, step, and you can see it broadly looks correct. It's looking similar to what we saw here. Yeah, it's actually got a few more waypoints in it that is built into it, so it's a bit more clever than LittleNavMap is. Okay, so to get that back into map mode, ready to fly, we can just do that, and we can reduce the range on this again, pull it back down. So we're back looking at our checklist again, having programmed the flight management computer. In the written notes I've done the basic instructions of what pages to look at and what buttons to press through the FMC. So we're going to go back overhead now we've done our flight plan, and we're going to go to the window heat section, which is, if I can find it, window heats, where are you? Here they are. You just press one of them and they all come on. And we're going to prepare for engine start. So we're going to go and turn the seatbelt signs to on to begin with. So they are somewhere down here. What we're looking for. Landing, seatbelts, auto. There we go. It goes straight to on. Then the lights section, we're going to go and turn the beacon light on. That tells the ground crew we're going to fire the engines up. Fuel section, we're going to go and turn the pumps on. So you've got the left pumps, the right pumps, and the centre pumps. You only have to switch them on for the tanks that have fuel in. You'll notice at the moment that says there's a pressure problem. If we go and have a look in the tanks, you will discover that the centre tanks have no fuel in them, which is why that's showing a pressure problem. So there's no need to have the centre tanks on if you've got no fuel in those tanks. So bleed air is over here. We go and turn on the bleed air for the left and the right sides of the aircraft. So the reason for that, the auxiliary power unit that we switched on earlier doesn't just generate electricity, it generates compressed air, and the compressed air is used to spin up the engines. But you have to go and turn the bleed air on for that to become possible. The APU is on auto here, so there's nothing else you have to do other than switch on the bleed air on the left and right hand sides. So once you've done that, you can actually start the engines. So to help us do this, we can also change the lower center screen to show engine data. So at the moment it's showing the fuel. If we press the eng button or engine button over here, it will go blank. If we press it again, it will come up with the engines. And another bug, it's showing 4 engines when actually this aircraft only has 2. So that's another hangover from it being a 747. Excuse me. So don't take much notice of that. It's not going to harm us through it having incorrect data on there. We're just going to look for some numbers as it does it. So back overhead, there the two start switches. So you want to start the right engine first. So if we click the knob, it goes to start, and if we look down here, you will see that the numbers for the N2 are coming up. So N2 is the speed of the gas turbine. When it gets to 20%, this is a percentage, we can advance the start lever for engine number 2, or the fuel control lever as it calls it in this aircraft. So it's gone past 20% already, so we can go and do that, and it will continue on accelerating. When the engine is up and running, the start switch will go back to norm all on its own. So we just wait for that to happen. It won't take too long. There we go. So now we can do engine number 1, or the left engine. So again, same process. We're watching the N2 numbers come up. So 1 and 3 on the 747. It's actually just engine number 1 we're looking at though. When it gets to 20%, we can advance the fuel control switch to run. There we go. So further up here, you've got the exhaust gas temperature showing, and you've got the N1 speed. That's the turbofan speed. So there's two main parts to each engine on this aircraft. There's the gas turbine, and then there's the turbofan. If you go and have a look outside, the bit in the middle is the gas turbine, and the big fan, you'll notice the outside of the engine is pretty much empty. You can't see through this quite easily from this direction. There's a big fan, and it's driven by the exhaust gas coming out of here pushes a turbine which has an axle to a bigger fan at the front. It's very clever. Anyway, very simple as well. Those engines are up and running. We can go and check the levers, the switches, sorry, overhead. Yes, they have started, which is good. So once the engines are up and running, we'll press Control 7 to center our view up looking overhead. We can go and turn the APU off, because the switching over power generation to the engines happens automatically in this aircraft. Okay, so now we're going to go down to the master control panel. So we're going to go to the pilot view. So the master control panel is this panel here, and this controls the autopilot of the aircraft. First thing we're going to do is turn the flight directors on. We're going to pre-select, you can see it's already done it. The heading has gone to the runway direction. So all we were going to do is set the heading, in case we have to go to heading mode on the autopilot, to the same direction as the runway during climb out. So we're going to set our cruise altitude, or our initial altitude for climb out. So if you're using ATC, you would be given an initial altitude to climb to, and then you would receive further instruction. And then obviously they might say to you then, climb to cruise, and you could put in your 36,000 or whatever it is you're climbing to. We'll leave ours at 10, that's fine. You can pre-select LNAV and VNAV mode. So LNAV is lateral navigation, so that means the aeroplane is going to follow automatically the route that you have programmed into the flight management computer. VNAV means if we were to go to 36,000, for example, as our target altitude, so let's go and put this up near it, so 36. If we go and look down here, and we look at the Route 1 legs, you can see there are not just the waypoints, there are speeds and altitudes. So it's going to go to 10,000 feet, 26,000 feet, and so on and so forth on the way around the route. So what this does, VNAV, means it will follow those restrictions that are programmed in automatically. So it will head towards your target altitude, but if it hits a restriction on the way, it will stop there until it has the next instruction that frees it up to go higher, for example. Okay, so we got the flight directors on. You won't be able to select LNAV and VNAV unless you have a flight plan with no discontinuities and the flight directors on. Okay. We've also got the auto throttle arming switches here, which we can go and arm. And the last thing we need to do really is go and calibrate the altimeters. So the shortcut to do that is press B. So you can see that happen. So what's happened there is we have tuned in this barometric pressure number, which you can control up here by rolling this knob. We've tuned it into the local barometric pressure because altimeters work by reading air pressure. So that makes it accurate to the ground where we are. Okay, so down at the bottom right over here we've got the auto brake. We set that to rejected takeoff. It won't make any difference to us on a normal climb out. Then we go to the screen over here and you can see a stab indicator. So we use the trim on our controller and we move the elevator trim to put the elevators in the middle of that green box. So based on all of the weight data we've given the computer and the configuration of the aircraft, it knows where the balance sits with the aircraft, so we can get the aeroplane. So the elevator is already trimmed, so when we get to the rotate speed on the runway, the nose won't be trying to go up or down. It will be in equilibrium. Okay? So we're essentially ready to taxi now. So we go back overhead and we go and turn the taxi lights on. We set flaps for takeoff, which we said was 10 degrees. So as soon as you move a flap lever, an indicator appears here. So at the moment it's saying 5 degrees. If I move it again, I've got 15. I want 10 though. Can I not get 10? Well, that's a shame. It hasn't got a setting for it. So I've chosen a... It's not tremendously important, to be honest. This aeroplane won't complain about it. Okay, so we could at this point taxi out to the runway. Once we get to the runway, I'm not actually going to do a flight with it today. We would set the transponder, the traffic collision avoidance system, sorry, to TARA. Yeah, which means traffic avoidance. I can't remember the exact acronyms, what they mean. It means we are going to hear messages from other aircraft and send messages, or we're going to respond and send. TA mode means we only hear the messages, we don't respond. If it's in TARA mode, it means once we're on autopilot, if something is on a collision course, our aircraft can go up and down to avoid automatically. Okay, so we may as well go and taxi out and at least do the climb out. So I've just come off the parking brake. We're not going to bother with pushback. We're just going to turn around at the gate here. We're a little way off the gate anyway, so it's not going to do any harm. Just advance the throttles gently. I think it's just useful to see those first few seconds of the flight. So let's turn the head tracking back on and center it up. There we go. This is the stock Stansted I've got today. I haven't got any of the fancy sceneries installed. And this is the stock version of the Captain Sim 777. I haven't got any realism mods installed or anything like that. Okay. So we're just going to run out to runway 22 at Stansted. So the only thing we've really done out of step here is turning on the TCAS system. So in a realistic Boeing, you get these nice buttons like the TFC button here, which will put range rings on the navigation display, and that hasn't been modelled in the Captain Sim, but it's not a huge loss. That looks like a 737-600. Isn't it short? Okay, so just rolling out to the runway so we can go and turn on the landing lights, turn on the strobes, and the single threading issue is showing up already with it loading assets in as we turn towards the runway. Okay, so our main considerations once we accelerate, so we're going to... Now there is a toga button on the controls. It's kind of hidden away. Can you see it down there? Oh no, they haven't modelled it. I tell a lie, they haven't modelled it. So we're just going to put the throttles up to the stops. So there are various generalizations in this aircraft, things it hasn't got. So you'll notice the throttles can go above 100%, or the engines can go above 100%. But you can't leave them there forever because it will damage the aircraft. So we're now waiting for the V-speeds to come through. You'll notice they seem incredibly high. So there we go. No more than 3 degrees per second on rotate. So we're in the air, gear comes up. We keep an eye on the airspeed though, look, because it does increase quickly. Come off the throttle a little bit. Managing the flaps. Flying the route, keeping an eye on the route. And once you're happy with everything, you can go and engage the autopilot. And notice we're not showing a target airspeed even though the auto throttle is armed. That's absolutely correct because VNav controls speed and climb rate, remember. So the plane's flying itself now and following the route. It's not tremendously good at it in this version of the aircraft, or certainly this screen is not as well drawn as you might hope. Yeah, you can see there it's doing a very simplified version of a curved line between 2 points. So this is going for that waypoint and then it will go for the next one. So it's not really following the line as such. But we're on our way. So your next consideration would be 6,000 feet. We're just coming through a transition altitude. So you would go and press the standard button up here and that goes to 2992, or it should. And it's not doing it. Okay, so I'm just going to turn off the head tracking a second so I can show you this. So what you do is you turn this to 2992. So you can see that shows there, and the other one to set is the backup attitude indicator. So it's showing 1024, it's 1013, is the same as 2992. So this is in hectopascals or millibars. Okay, so this is in inches, and you can change the format of the display here by clicking the outer ring here. So we now put that into hectopascals instead of inches, and it's showing that. Okay, so the throttles have come off because there's obviously an altitude restriction here at 10,000 feet, which we've just come up to. You can see the target airspeed that it's flying to. But anyway, we're getting away from ourselves and we're actually ending up flying the entire route. Now we're at 10,000 feet, the landing gear can come, sorry, not the landing gear, the lights can come up, come off even. And we're on our way. Should we have a look at it from outside? It's a pretty aeroplane, isn't it? As I said, this is a very budget level aircraft, and it's a great on-ramp for anybody that's wondering about the big jets. It's got some of the systems modelled. If you do know, in detail about how it should be working, this might be quite frustrating for you because bits and pieces are missing and the guidance isn't as good as it might be. And like the numbers are wrong, for example. And there's things that are not being rendered correctly. You can see there's odd bits that seem a little bit broken. But it's not actually that bad. It works. Let's put it that way. So it will generally follow a route. So here we go, look, it's just been given, going through the waypoint, it can now climb to a higher altitude, so it's going to do so. Doesn't always make a lot of sense though, but... So it's going for... Yeah, it's interesting, look, even though this has got 10,000 feet at TNT, it's not doing that. Or maybe it is. It's just because we've gone through 10,000 feet now, it's accelerating, yeah. So below 10,000 feet you have to hold 250 knots. And there may have been a speed restriction on the previous step until we got to that point. Probably for noise abatement, I would imagine. Anyway, there we go. So that was getting the airplane up and running and off the runway and off to the races. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Obviously there's a lot more to cover in terms of playing with the flight computer, and some of the buttons work, some of them don't, and you'll discover that along the way. But this aircraft, I think I paid about £16 for it, which is about $20. It's very reasonable really, and it looks the part, and there's loads of liveries available for it in the marketplace. Loads and loads of them. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you again soon.